Hello and welcome. You're watching this very special telecast on budget dialogues here on ET Now. Today we're going to focus on how things need to be addressed, how things are developing on customs and global trade point of view for our country, and how budget could also be a platform to take the momentum higher. The three special guests who are joining me today in this discussion are Mr. Mani from Deloitte. I also have Mr. Sunil Kukreja of Birla Carbon. He's the global head of tax, and Mr. Mayur Kapasi is joining me from BASF, the global chemical major. He, of course, handles all the customs operations at BASF. Gentlemen, all three of you, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Mani, I'll start with you. Though we know that there's a momentum in the economy, and there is also a lot of momentum in policy making and the thrust to take the economic momentum higher. But nevertheless, budget is also a platform where the reflection of that policy is also seen, and a messaging to the economy, to various stakeholders, all of that actually happens. So from global trade point of view, it appears that this government is quite serious in making an impact on global trade, and we are reaching out like never before to the world on manufacturing services and working our practices as well, reworking I would say. How to your mind is the opportune time, this budget as well, to make an impact as far as global trade is concerned?
Okay, so thanks for having me. The way I would look at it is to say, as we say in Deloitte parlance, make an impact that matters. So the budget needs to make an impact that matters, more so in respect of customs and global trade. So when we look at customs and global trade, I think the budget is based on a foundation of three pillars. The first pillar is the fact that we need to be concerned about the current account deficit. So CAD is one of the underlying features of the budget.
Which is a directly high actually.
Absolutely. The second pillar which the budget needs to consider is the Atmanirbhar Bharat related policies. It could be the PLI, it could be various other schemes, but Atmanirbhar Bharat and domestic manufacturing is certainly one more scheme. The third pillar to my mind is the recent FTAs that we have entered into. We have already done the needful in respect of UAE and Australia. The one with UK is at an advanced stage, and we'll see quite a few more. So if we take the CAD on one side, Atmanirbhar Bharat on one side, and FTAs on another side, it makes a very interesting triangle for the policy formulation. Because by each of these, what is it that we are trying to convey to the rest of the world? We are trying to convey to the rest of the world that, look, we are open for business big time. We are open for business in a manner that we have never been open in the past, before. We welcome overseas investors. We would love to open up various sectors in the country to attract them and have more investment. We want to make our domestic supply chains very, very resilient. We don't want domestic supply chains to have any kind of shock, even if there is a global disruption. So when we look at all of these as the underlying factors, it leads to a few, I would say, interpretations. The first is the fact that there would be a consistent thrust now, as we have seen in the last 2 years, that customs duty on import of finished goods is kept a little on the higher side. And customs duties on raw materials and intermediaries are kept on the lower side when those items are for sectors which are import dependent.
Let's take the discussion forward, Mr. Kapasi, Mr. Kukreja. In fact, I'll come to you first, Mr. Kapasi. We've seen that in the last, say, a year or so, there has been a lot of momentum on free trade agreement front. India wants to have a lot of trade agreements with countries, and especially where we are big trading partners, like Australia, he spoke about. And there are other countries who are keen to have free trade agreements with us, because it clearly shows that we are keen to increase our engagement on global trade going forward. How do you think on customs front we can make changes which can take that ambition of ours higher?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on this show. Yes, you have rightly mentioned, and my colleague Mr. Mani mentioned, there are last 2 years, 2 FTAs have been signed. The first was with the UAE, which was like CEPA, we can say Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, wherein it was signed on 18th Feb and went live on the 2nd April, or I would rather say 1st May onwards, wherein almost more than 11,000 line items have been considered from India side for the trade in goods, in terms of the reduction in the duty. And from the UAE side, more than 7,500 line items have been added, for the duty reductions over a period of, some are immediate, some are over a period of 3 to 10 years. And the sectors which are various, included in this particular, I would say FTA is, gems, jewelry, engineering goods, the sports, the various others which are very, required for in India to generate the 1 million jobs over a period of, let's say 5 years, because UAE is considered as, the third largest trading partner for India and the second largest export destination. The trade is expected to grow, let's say in 5 years, by $50 billion, because India has aiming to be $5 trillion economy by 2025, and this FTA will play a big role. Another FTA which came into existence last week of the December is India-Australia Economic Cooperation Trade Agreement, ECTA we call it as. Again, this agreement, the India parts, almost 100% items of tariff line items will be accessible for the Australia market, and for the Australia side it will be around 75% market would be accessible for the Australia sides. So what we are trying to say is that the trade will grow with Australia to $100 billion in 5 years. So I mean, there is a lot of opportunity both for the India importers and exporters in terms of getting the raw materials at the concessional rate, plus making the finished goods and exporting to the the UAE and Australia, and create the market for the India material, the manufacturing units.
Right, Mr. Kukreja, in this ambition of ours, we are aiming to be 3% of global trade by 27, and even higher 10% by 47. And there are some issues. Free trade agreements will be enablers of one sort. But at the other side, we are also aiming to be a very strong, powerful base for manufacturing, because we ourselves consume a lot of that manufactured item. So if we look at those import substitutes which we are working towards, to your mind, how can that be implemented? How can we reverse that massive list of import items which we already do for our country, start manufacturing all of that ourselves, use bulk of it for our own consumption, and then look for global export opportunity there as well, as a part of Atmanirbhar India?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. As you know, the government has already initiated moving towards become a more Atmanirbhar on India. The purpose, the many places where government forums, in many forums they have, trying to explain Atmanirbhar is that increasing the localization of the business where we can manufacture the goods, and it's not a intent to bring back the Inspector Raj, but it's a brand our localism, increase our production capacity. Recently, if you see, government launched product linked incentives, PLI, in 14 sectors, which not only create an additional job for the local Indian markets, plus they are aiming to increase the capacity by 50 lakhs, which really government is clear vision how we wanted to move forward and create a heavy footprint in the global market. Plus, even if you see recently, we have initiated own manufacturing in arms and ammunitions, plus proposed Desh bill, which will create a portal where it will be allowed, the single portal where you will get all the permission available, single window, which will do ease of doing the businesses. Right? That help, the Indian market, the foreign MNCs to come with a FDI, create more manufacturing setups in India, and go with a global footprint like China.
Sure. And even now we are talking about not only China +1, plus Europe +1.
Right.
So the world is looking at a reliable trade partner, and we can, get our own house in order in many ways to, enable that. Right. So let's, Mr. Mani, I'll come back to you. What are some of the specific areas on customs reforms front, which if we work towards or move in that direction, can really speed up this process of raising our share in export or global trade, which we aim to do?
Look, there is a lot of reform that has already happened on customs over the last, I would say, 3, 4, 5 years or so. It is certainly easier to do business today in India from an import-export perspective than it was in the past, certainly, undoubtedly. but there is much more that can possibly be done.
In fact, Mr. Mani was telling me that you bring in a lot of experience as well, because your organization works in 40 countries at one go. So you know exactly where it's coming from. I understand. Mr. Kapasi, what are your own thoughts on this issue of ease of doing business, regulatory compliances, processes? Where do you think there is scope for improvement, which we can take?
Right. So before answering that question, I will give some perspective from the BASF side.
Sure, sure. Please.
So we are into the import of the all major chemicals, which are, we do for stock and sell also, and also chemicals we import for our manufacturing units, which we have, across the pan India.
Sure.
Having said that, the focus for us is, how we can reduce the dwell time for clearance, and continuously, and also the cost, because both go hand in hand.
Hand in hand.
Having said that, we always try to maximize whatever the customs facilitation is there in terms of authorized economic operator. We call it as a green channel in a layman term.
Okay.
So you have various tier 1, 2, 3 are there, which customs introduced about 3 years ago, in order to ensure that the importers are given more facility.
Sure.
Reduce the checks
Time.
in terms of declarations or the inbound,
It's
outbound
like a
declarations.
pre-KYC already done.
Yeah.
So you can.
Yeah. So we are, I would say, authorized economic operator tier 2, and will be. I have already applied for tier 3, and will be soon getting in another couple of months or so, which will help us. For I would say 95 to 98% declaration will be just passed without any examinations as such.
Sure.
And we'll be able to clear the cargo within 24 to 36 hours. Currently, our clearance lead time is within 2 days. We are clearing 90% shipments.
Okay.
That we are targeting to go below that, let's say 36 to 24 hours. That's what our aim is. And in terms of cost reduction, we are trying to get it directly from port.
Okay.
So that we can get it from port to our plant or our warehouse, and we can avoid the intermediaries and save the cost, which can really go to the working capital and the bottom line.
Exactly, and hence enhancement of shareholder value.
Yes.
All stakeholders actually are final beneficiaries of these efficiencies which you're talking about. And in the economy country perspective, the country efficiencies goes up. Absolutely. So our ratings and our whole earnings of the country actually goes up. But coming back,
2-3 points I would like to add is which government can help is improving the faceless assessment, which my colleague Mr. Sunil Kukreja mentioned, because you have the declaration going to the faceless, but the person who is managing that checking of that particular declaration should act fast.
Sure.
And that's a ideal. That is a kind of a requirement from the CBSE side, that person should not remain at that desk. It should move to the next desk for the further clearance process. And second is, there are various agencies are there which is associated with the customs, which you call it as a food safety standard, or the drug controller. We should work in hand with customs for faster movement of goods, which require all this kind of permissions.
So the synergies. That so many departments are working around it. If they can work together, on the one hand you are already pre-authorizing some agencies or some entities, so time will be saved there, plus processes can be saved if many agencies work together to it. That's a very valid point. Mr. Mani, coming back to that issue of current accounts deficit, because all of this has a kind of a impact on CAD, and the government is wanting to move in reduction. Perhaps a lot of reduction would be seen going forward. But how can reworking or doing the changes that you're talking about on customs front can also aid bringing down CAD?
See, the way it works is, I think our CAD on the import side, I mean, what is contributing, CAD is a function of imports and exports. So there are quite a few export promotion schemes that we have undertaken recently, which are certainly benefiting. But on the import side, our import basket largely comprises of petroleum products, which is very, very big. It also comprises large amount of fertilizers, and it comprises all other goods, put together, the electronics, the hardware, software, everything together. Now, if we look at petroleum products, it's very difficult to reduce the import, because reducing petroleum imports or discouraging petroleum imports by more customs duty effectively means that we are depriving the feedstock in the country as a whole.
Correct.
Now, as far as fertilizer is concerned, I believe there is already action which has been taken to encourage production of fertilizer within the country, ramp up existing capacities, but that's a 2 to 3 year time frame issue.
It will take time.
It will take time. We have also seen the results of some neighboring countries moving away from inorganic fertilizers to organic fertilizers and the difficulties it caused to the economy as a whole.
Yes.
So possibly we will be hesitating to tread that path, and we will keep fertilizers constant till we have production capacity to match the demand.
To match it up.
So what this boils down to, therefore, is the residual category of all other goods. We import a lot of servers, we import a lot of electronic hardware, we import a lot of flat TV panels, we import a lot of furniture.
After oil, I think electronics is the second or third largest component of
Absolutely. But again, electronics
Can be
import is a function of chip manufacturing ability, which will take 2, 3, 4 years to happen within the country. So many of the steps that the government is taking now will we will certainly see light at the end.
But few years far
But few years down the line, some maybe 2 years. So some of them, like assembly of mobile phones, we are already seeing encouraging results, right? Some others may have a shorter lead time. Automobiles have done very, very well even in terms of export from India.
Yes.
So some will have shorter lead time, some will have more lead time. But each of them will need to be treated differently.
I have a follow-up question from you, because you must have studied a lot of business models of countries, economic models to say, across the world. If you could share some of the best practices which you spoke about, like on global trade or international trade front, but when countries want to enhance their manufacturing share in GDP or global trade, how have they managed to do it? In what, does it take decades, or it has happened in years also? Say, when Taiwan was starting up their chip manufacturing, or even a lot of electronic related manufacturing in China for that matter, or in US and Europe. Have you studied the models, how we can learn from them and also?
Absolutely. So what we have seen is that the world shows two different trends.
Okay.
There is one trend which we have seen in some parts of the developed world, which was all about outsourcing.
Okay.
So manufacturing actually became very unfashionable because it was cheaper to manufacture it somewhere else, right? And the value add was more in trading, and the value add was not in manufacturing. So we have seen that on one side. We have also seen smaller, I would say relatively smaller economies like a Taiwan or even a Vietnam, going whole hog on the manufacturing supply chain. Recent times, we have seen countries like Bangladesh emerging as a force to reckon on the textile bit. Now, Bangladesh started much after we started on textiles. But they are doing very, very well when it comes to textile exports today.
They've taken over in many ways.
They've taken over in many ways for certain product categories, may not be, overall. So, depending on the sector, some may have a shorter lead time. So, if we want to have the entire value chain for textiles, which is the yarn and the apparel and the yarn, the fabric and the apparel, that's a relatively small time limit thing. it can happen in 1 year. If you're talking of something like chip manufacturing, may take 4 or 5 years or so.
Sure.
But the biggest point is, look, we got to start sometime, someday. Sure. So why don't we start now and benefit in future?
Mr. Kapasi, before we wind up, some closing comments. If there are 2 suggestions you would like to give to the policy makers, to the stakeholders who are involved in the process of making budget or policy making in general, one in the area of customs and one in the area of boosting our share of global trade, international trade, what would those be?
In terms of customs, I would say on import side, make more process robust in terms of the declaration checking less and more passing through.
Okay.
They can involve more audit process after clearance, do the audit of the entities and see where there is a gap in terms of duty, collection or any other thing. So make the declaration filing till clearance more streamlined.
Sure.
From export side, many the exporters, they try to go for direct factory, put cargo stuffed into the container and put it into the port so that they can avoid the intermediates. Give streamline the process of issuing the permission from GST and customs for these self-sealing permission, and on the improving the overall share in the market. I would say that the a process or a steps needs to be taken to avoid the impact of the global supply chain disruptions.
Sure.
Maybe by introducing our own shipping line, Indian shipping line, because we see shipping line from many other countries.
Coming here and operating, we don't have.
Can we have some kind of a shipping line penetration from India side so that exporters and importers can gain?
Sure. Mr. Kukreja?
So I will add what Mayur has said. So I will more focus on as we are trying to move on a global market. So many companies in India and across global has a cross-border transactions, intercompany transactions. Currently, if you see, there are two regulations which follow. One is under the tax domain as a transfer pricing, and another domain as a customs.
Sure.
But the intention of both is different. So custom always wanted to increase the value to generate more duty amount, whereas transfer pricing wanted lower transfer price to increase more profit into India. We need to create a valuation harmonization into this.
Okay.
That is the most important to become a competitive in global markets and
All right, gentlemen, all three of you, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Guys, with that, it's back in the studios. Hope you enjoyed our special telecast on budget dialogues, the one where we had BASF, we had Birla Carbon, and also Deloitte sharing their inputs on how things are moving on right now and where are the scope and the challenges which we need to overcome in this budget 2023. Thanks very much for joining us today.